On this vein, we continue with the subject. Political analyst Professor Habib, who is also director of the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London, says political courage is needed to address the security dilemma to avoid being held hostage by rogue actors. He says the progressive intelligentsia too easily dismiss the call for a state of emergency, saying they need to recognize that South Africa is not Canada or New Zealand and its security challenges are far more serious. Professor Habib joins us now to expand a little bit more about the piece that he wrote. So let's just first start with this. You say, like some people, okay, let me just go back. You say, some like me who have written about these issues before have also kept quiet so that as to not make easy comments from afar. So what exactly did you mean by this? And I'm quite interested to see if you feel your silence has served you, no matter how brief it was.
So, well, I was just simply saying that I am somebody, as you well know, who's living in London now. I've moved over to London to take over as directorship of the School of Oriental and African Studies. And while I've written about this many times, I felt that I as an individual could not make easy commentary from so far. So what I did is waited for 10 days, listened to all of the remarks, listened to the commentary of those people on the ground, and then in a sense reflected on their thoughts and played it back to them saying, here's where I think you're right, here's where I think there are question marks in the way you're arguing this. And that's why, if you like, I wrote the piece, so that I couldn't make day-to-day commentary, but I could help thinking through the challenges that we confront and looking potentially at solutions.
So what you've said is that a lot of it has circled around the socio-economic aspect, but you're saying really what it is the security conundrum, that inequality alone, while it accounts in the main for the gratuitous character, as you say, of our violence, it can't explain why the violence in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng erupted at this moment. So what would we have missed in the past, and have the previous comments then appeared linear in your view?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's right to say that inequality in our society socially polarizes it, and it makes us vulnerable. And that we can't have sustainable addressing of the social polarization without addressing inequality. There's no doubt about it. But if you're going to resolve inequality, you need growth. And if you need growth, you need investment. And if you need investment, you need political stability and security. And actually, you need to take that seriously. Otherwise, you don't get the investment, and you don't get the growth, and you don't get the addressing of inequality. And so, in a sense, you have to deal with stability and you have to deal with security. You also have to deal with state capacity. And we know that that just doesn't exist in many parts of the state. If you look at places like Singapore and South Korea and all of these places we love talking about, well, in all of those cases, they had stability and security, they had state capacity, and then they had economic growth that allowed them to address economic inequalities. Now, the problem in South Africa, and I think we mustn't duck this, there was a concrete attempt by political forces to spark a rebellion in the country. I think that they lost control of that rebellion. In our context, it went viral, and it threatened and became the most significant challenge to the state since 1994. I think we should be worried about that. And we should make sure that there isn't a second attempt at sparking those rebellions.
So you said so worried that we should have considered a state of emergency. I'm imagining that's what you're saying, because you're saying that people were too quick to dismiss it. But I'm wondering, is it not contradictory if in the same article you also talk about a skepticism, deep skepticism around the security among activists, intellectuals, and a complacency among political violence that this has engendered? So what would have been the function of that?
Well, the function of a state of security, a state of emergency, it seems to me, particularly in the two provinces, was to have got troops on the ground quickly, was to have ensured that you don't create a situation where vigilantes are managing the security of their own suburbs. To be honest, in many cases, those suburbs were left abandoned by the police, and therefore people had to take the law into their own hands to protect themselves and their loved ones and their homes. And effectively, the state abrogated its responsibility to its citizens. You respect obedience from your citizens. You get that obedience only when you give them security. And the state failed in its primary responsibility to its citizens in many parts of KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng. And so in a sense, what you want to do immediately is ensure that you bring back security into those places, that the state provides it, that you don't have private citizens taking the law into their own hands, and you re-establish your commitment as a state to fulfilling your responsibility to your citizens. That wasn't done. People say to me that it can be done by the Disaster Management Act. You led on a story that spoke about what's happening in Phoenix. Does that demonstrate that, is that not evidence that we have not brought things under our control? And that actually large amounts of our citizens felt obliged to take the law into their own hands with disastrous consequences for everybody. So that's what I'm asking about. Let me give you one other example, Sapis. We've had a low-intensity war in Mooi River for many years where people regularly burn down trucks. Tell me how many democratic societies in the world will allow the burning of trucks that compromise the logistics infrastructure of a nation to happen repeatedly on its major highway. How is this allowed to happen? And how is the ruling party or the government are sitting aside and saying we don't have to do something urgent? So clearly we need to start taking security seriously, democracy.
So I want to talk about just how seriously, and in tandem with that discussion on democracy, you speak about the foundational principles of a democratic state. You also talk about a capable state. Wouldn't declaring a state of emergency have been a final port of call? And if you are to whip into shape some of those rogue political actors that you mentioned in the article, which you say have used instances like Margana as a political whip, would that have been the right message? While there has been an acknowledgement by the state that its security apparatus did not behave in a manner that imbued, faith in them, a state of security, would that have been the way to deal with all of these things while saying we are a capable democratic state?
Well, it seems to me that it would have done two things, particularly if it were done partially, both in KwaZulu-Natal. First, it would have created a clear line of accountability to the Commander-in-Chief. The Commander-in-Chief has, in essence, been paralyzed by a divided party. That's what we've had. He hasn't been able to act efficiently and effectively because his party is factionalized. A state of emergency in those two provinces would have made it clear that the person who's the boss of the security services is the president, the commander-in-chief. And everybody takes the line of authority from him. And it would have aligned directly the line of authority to the president themselves. Second, it would have prevented malevolent political actors who have used civil liberties and the democratic rights that they have to manipulate our society and destroy the rights of its citizens. People have repeatedly played with our rights so that they can advance malevolent agendas that destabilize our state and violate the rights of our collective citizens. Those people need to be held accountable. The people who need to be held accountable is those that burn trucks on the Mooi River platform. We should be having full security there, those people arrested, and them being completely processed through the criminal justice system. We need to do that effectively. We need to do those elsewhere, including in Phoenix, if they have broken the law. And we need to act against political actors who play the race game and try to divide our society. You know, we go against easy targets. The woman who effectively makes racist statements on the beach in Durban. But we allow our politicians to make the most racialized of statements without any action being taken against them. It's time that this country, its liberal establishments, its intellectual establishment, and its political establishment realized we need to take security seriously. And we can't behave as if we're in Canada or if we are in New Zealand. We're in South Africa with all of its difficulties, and we need to manage it like we're in South Africa.
All right. Thank you so much for speaking to us, political analyst Professor Adam Habib. He is a political analyst, as I mentioned, but also director of the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London.